Okay, thank you for staying around or joining us for the next session this afternoon. This one is called Empowering Change, How Do We Build a Skills System for a Thriving Future? Quite a small question to resolve in an hour or so, but with an amazing panel and with you in the audience, we'll resolve it in the next 60 minutes, I'm absolutely sure. Now, some housekeeping first of all. There isn't a fire alarm planned, so if it goes off, there is a fire exit there and behind you as well. So just be aware of that. So I've got three amazing panelists here. To my immediate right is Dr. Anne-Marie Imafidon. Anne-Marie is co-chair at the Institute for the Future of Work. This is an independent research and development institute exploring how new technologies are transforming work and working lives. She's also co-founder of STEMETS, which is an award-winning social enterprise connecting the next generation of women and non-binary people into science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths, STEAM. And then we have Mary Curnock-Cook. Mary is an independent education expert serving in a non-executive capacity on a number of boards. She's chair of Pearson Education UK and chair of the governing body of the Dyson Institute of Engineering and Technology, and network chair for Emerge Education. Mary, of course, you'll all know her as the former chief executive of UCAS. And then I have Rebecca Garrod-Waters. Rebecca is Chief Executive of UFI VocTech Trust. You should all know this, but UFI VocTech Trust is a grant funder and venture investor focused on unlocking the full potential of technology to improve skills and work to deliver better outcomes for all. She joined UFI in 2014, and her background is in technology and innovation policy and economic development. So there we are. Before we start, I just want to sort of set the scene a bit with sort of 3 points of reference. There's lots of different factors at play in the challenges that are faced by the skills system. Obviously, that's embedded in the wider economy, public services, and society. But the first is, a point of reference is enormous resource constraint. And whether we're talking about public investment and expenditure or private investment and expenditure, it is quite apparent in the next few years, things are going to be very tight and very difficult. We've got a very difficult spending review coming. Obviously, that window of resource and budgeting is changing all the time, given global events. We've seen what's happened this week, obviously, with welfare reform and changes there, and rumours about cuts to a variety of budgets. So it's a very difficult resource environment. And meanwhile, businesses and others are tightly watching their investment in skills, learning, and development. And in fact, the brilliant session we had just before this one was talking about some of the impacts of those constraints, much more focus on the types of things that businesses are willing to invest in when it comes to learning and development. Alongside that, we have sort of ongoing and persistent need. There are now 100,000 more young people who are not in education, employment or training than there were a year ago. There are shifts in skills, demands and needs as the economy and labour market changes. And all this, of course, is in part related to the third point of reference, which is technology itself. And whether that's the AI, however you want to describe it, the shift, the revolution that is upon us, either through technology, with technology, or the need to learn about technology, it is changing the demands of people as they upskill, as they reskill, as they seek to adapt to a changing environment. So lots of crunchy context as we go into this discussion. And I'm going to open up to the panelists, but I should say just before I do that, I'm going to come to the audience after we've had a conversation for about half an hour or so. So it'd be great to have your thoughts and questions when I do so. So just bear that in mind as we're going. So to open up, and I'm going to start with Anne-Marie because she's to my immediate right. What should the skills system of the future achieve that the current system is not? What should it address in ways that we are currently falling short?
Small question to kick off with, right? I should definitely always pick pick a better seat as well to sit on stage. So very, very excited to be here. Thanks for having me here. And also thank you very much to UFI VocTech for their support of the Institute for the Future of Work on our upcoming Flourish project that addresses exactly this need. So lots of things to consider that the system is kind of failing and underperforming at the moment. I think number one would be this notion of lifelong learning, and a genuine notion of lifelong learning. I think there's a lot of emphasis in the wrong place, a lot of failures in different spaces, but this idea of kind of formal education being the main space and the only place that people are able to learn skills, that happening at particular ages and particular times in someone's life, and that being restrictive of folks having different circumstances that they might have as they grow older, as their circumstances change, as they have caring, lots of other things. So I think enabling lifelong learning, allowing folks to have the funding and the resources, but also the kind of capacity to learn as they go is incredibly important. And you hinted there at reskilling and upskilling as part of our Flourish project with UFI VocTech. We've also looked at capability building for folks as well. And this is the notion that it's not just about upskilling on the skills you already have and reskilling to a new set of skills, but also what's the agency you have around the way that those skills might be deployed along someone's career. So it not just being driven by employers in the market, but also being driven by you as an individual and kind of what fulfillment looks like. So I think that's point one. Point two is around inclusion. And the different types of people that, again, should be able to access skill building scenarios. As you mentioned, I run an organisation called STEMETS. We stop at 25, so not quite adult learning, but it definitely is still something of who are the types of people that feel comfortable in these spaces where you're building the skills. We've got the curriculum review, and I know the interim report kind of came out yesterday, but how much do folks feel a sense of belonging? You hit there on tech skills. We're looking at gender in particular. What's the experience that women have when they are engaging in, computing science, university department? How inclusive is that? How much is there a sense of belonging? How much do we have equitable practice in those spaces so we can be asset-based rather than deficit-based in the way that we engage with learners? But also folks can feel that there's value that they have and that they can bring to particular spaces when they are developing those skills and the new learning that they have. And I think the final piece, and it's a tough one a little bit for folks to get their heads around, especially against this backdrop of tech skills, was kind of highlighted in kind of high definition very, very clearly by our recent Pearson review that we've completed at the Institute for the Future of Work. And this is the notion of the balance of skills or the mix of skills that we want to see from folks in order for them to be future-proofed. So we mentioned there that STEMETS, we look at STEAM, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths, and having a cross-curricular approach. With the Pearson review, we use some machine learning to analyse tens of millions of job roles and job descriptions across a period, and looked at how the tech skills, or how the different types of skills that were being required by employers. And we saw quite a lot of movement in the tech skills, but not as much movement on what you might call core skills, or kind of core competencies. We used to call them soft skills because we devalued them, soft skills versus hard skills. But how do we allow folks to have skills across a number of different places and have that additive, where then you've got critical thinking, you've got collaboration, you've got creativity alongside someone building data skills, coding skills, insert name of whatever hard skill it is that you want. So I think there's quite a lot of things, right, that we need to upgrade. But I think those three, if we're able to sort at least those three, then maybe we'd be onto a winner.
Right. All three of those are massive. And we'll dive in deeper on each of them as we go in our conversation. Mary, what should a skill system do?
I think I've got 3 years. Oh, no, maybe I've got 3.5. One's quite similar to yours. And thank you also for the invitation to be here. It's great to talk about skills, which is such an important conversation. So my first one is about leading, not lagging. And I think at the moment we've got too many systems which kind of look backwards, or they're anchored too firmly in the sort of near present. And that just does not work for a rapidly changing workplace and skills ecosystem. So things like national occupational standards, which the government use to underpin qualifications and apprenticeships and technical qualifications and so on, many of these are completely out of date. Even by the time the qualifications that they're based on are available, the time to develop new national occupational standards and then develop qualifications on top of them is just it's way too long. And you see it in apprenticeship frameworks as well, which have got similar problems of having outdated requirements in them, and that's another nail in the coffin that makes them less attractive to employers and also to apprentices. So I think we need to look for ways of ensuring standards, which are important, and relevance for skills that's somehow in live, real-time, updated and current for emerging skills needs. So that's my first point. My second point is quite a broad point about accessibility, because I think if we want more people to undertake skills training, whether they're school leavers or existing employees who need upskilling or reskilling, or people who are underemployed or unemployed, they really need clarity about what funding support is available. They need clarity about the currency of the qualifications that they're going to get, their currency for further employment or progression. Are they stackable? What does it all lead to? And they need opportunities to learn that fit around messy lives, which of course are full of other priorities, including work and families and moving house and job changes and marriage, birth and death and all of that. And that means, that we have to find ways of delivering learning that is flexible and works around what people's real lives look like. So short durations, different start and finish dates, anytime, anywhere access, and of course loads of quite personalised support for learners. Then my third point is about qualifications and credentials, because I think people really mind about that. I don't think they particularly want to do training that doesn't have some kind of recognition and currency attached. It needs to have kind of a high quotient of CV candy, doesn't it? To make it worth someone investing their time and maybe their money as well. I do think, and this might be a bit controversial, I do think that actually that brands are incredibly important for qualifications, and nobody wants a qualification that no one's ever heard of. And there's been way too much change, and actually I think quite meaningless labelling of different types of qualifications in the skills place that no one really understands. And I could name a few acronyms: T levels, FSQ, tech levels, AGQs, AAQs, TOQs, which I'd never even heard of before they popped up, actually, I think, in the curriculum and assessment review. Yes, I thought, what's that? HT, I really challenge anyone to make sense of all of this. Meanwhile, we have got some well-established brands like GCSE, like A-Level, BTEC, HNDs, HNCs, City and Guilds, and they've been around for decades. And guess what? Even though what they represent might change over time, they really command public trust and understanding, and that's incredibly important in this world. So I think we need simple naming conventions so that users, both students and employers, can really easily understand what a qualification means and what its currency is. And then finally, and this is really your point about inclusion, let's try and remember to build and design a skills system around all the people who need new and updated skills. They're not always white-collar professionals climbing the ladder of corporate life. They're also blue-collar and they're no-collar workers. They're deskless workers. They're low-paid or not well-informed workers. Some of them are work-less, people who've never worked, people with low language skills or low literacy and numeracy. The hard to reach. And by the way, they're known as hard to reach because they actually are quite hard to reach, and we really have to work on that. I'll stop there, thank you.
No, brilliant. Thank you, Mary. Lots of crossover that we'll come back to. Rebecca, what do we need to change?
Thank you, although I'm not sure how I can say anything new at this point, but I think picking up on both of your points about the sort of all of those issues around what we teach, how we teach it, and how we recognise it. And I think for me, it's always tied up in what's the point and purpose of the teaching and training in the first place. From a societal level, why do we do this? And I think so often we end up thinking about, well, what's the shape of? How do we tweak the shape of this bit of the system, rather than what's the big end goal and how do we help more people achieve it? And I think that there's something really important and powerful around that kind of credentialing and recognition of skills piece that we can utilise to both keep people motivated, to improve learner confidence, but also to help kind of put some clarification around that. What does this qualification mean? And I think your point, Mary, about the strength of existing brands is an important one. I think there's a danger if you keep picking things up and putting them down in a different place with a new brand on, then they lose all their currency. But that doesn't mean that you can't be thoughtful about how those things are packaged up and what it means to go on the journey that gets you to that qualification. And I think that for me, and I in part would say this because obviously we have a big interest in tech, and also we're co-chairing the Digital Badging Commission, but I think being really thoughtful about what we mean about credentialing and badging and how that can be tied into formal qualification, rather than it being something that's seen as that's the second best soft skill thing that isn't part of this formal process. And because time and time again we see things that are consolation prizes, and so I think making sure we value things equitably is going to be a really important part of it, and very much linked to that kind of learners furthest from opportunity piece.
Brilliant. Okay, so there's been lots of reform of the skills system over the years, and we are where we are. And a common theme, I think, that you all touched on was purpose, as you described it, Rebecca, but then that digging through very quickly into people and who we serve in the system and how we serve them. And I guess my question is, who's getting missed and who is at risk of being missed in getting the skills and capabilities that they need to thrive in a modern marketplace, to thrive in a modern labour market, to thrive in the economy as it's shifting with its technological shifts and so on. So who is at risk, and how do we stop them falling through the net? Mary, if I can come to you on that one first.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. Actually, I've also been involved in a Nuffield-funded project that's kind of a sister project to the Pissarides review, which is called Skills Imperative 2035, which is looking at exactly that. It's looking at how the shape of jobs available and the skills required to do those jobs is going to change mainly through kind of automation and technology. And it's not so much that the net number of jobs is going to decrease hugely, but it's what happens in those jobs and the skills needed in those jobs. And there's something like 12 million low-skilled jobs which are seen to be at quite significant risk of disappearing over the next decade. So, potentially millions of people whose jobs are going to be at risk, and because they're low-paid, low-skilled jobs, very often, mostly, they're low-skilled, low-qualified workers. And so there's a huge need to put a safety net around those people so that they don't go on a kind of a doom cycle of either transitioning, when their jobs disappear, transitioning into worklessness, or transitioning into another high-risk job, where they're just kind of putting off the day when they lose their jobs even further. And so finding a way to put a safety net around those lower skilled workers. On the whole, people with higher level skills and qualifications are probably going to be okay because jobs are kind of moving up the skill levels. But yeah, so for me, the key group to hit is those lower skilled workers.
That last group you mentioned are also far more likely to engage in skills training of different types. Rebecca?
We do know, don't we, that the more you have, the more you get given. So that's always a kind of reinforcing problem. But I think there's also something that's sort of aligned with what you were saying about the skill level. But actually, There's a big challenge around entry-level jobs, and we can see it in what would have traditionally been sort of jobs and careers that might have required more skills, more training. So I'm thinking about the legal profession, I'm thinking about coding. If you look at these areas, we're starting to see the erosion of the entry-level piece because AI is the capability is increasing at such a rate. And the problem is then you have this sort of mismatch between where the jobs start and where people can come in, and how do people grow into good jobs?
Good point.
And I think that is going to be an increasing challenge, and it's going to disproportionately affect people who are already furthest from opportunity.
Yeah. Anne-Marie, this must be something you see all the time. That STEMettes must experience exactly those sorts of risks.
Yes, but I guess, as I said, they're a little bit younger, right? So it is the entry-level issue again of how do you define what that progress looks like in the era of AI, where there are so many of the kind of early entry tasks that have now been automated or are now disappearing. And I think it's a challenge. Actually ends up being a challenge for management and the folks that are kind of in leadership in those fields. How are you able to evaluate folks? How are they able to kind of learn the trade? How are they able to pick up all this tacit knowledge if it's something that's now been encoded and has been automated? I think you also have the folks that are kind of underemployed already, as we've said. You know, if you're already starting from kind of behind, then you are going to be kind of held back. I think that the final group that maybe we also need to be kind of conscious of is those for whom skills building hasn't been something they've consciously done or engaged with as they've grown and as they've built. And it's kind of a little bit of why we're working on this Flourish project with UFI VocTech of often you don't know what you do know.
Yes.
Right? And if it's something that's not been certified or has not been kind of recognised, in something that's branded, I think there's a lot of folks for whom the idea that they're building skills or they have to go back again, there's quite a big jump or a big challenge of what does that look like, but also they end up feeling disengaged or feeling like they've got less agency because it feels again like someone else is defining what should be next on that pathway, rather than them being able to say, I recognise this is what I do, and this is a co-correlated skill that is kind of adjacent to it, and so actually if I pick this up as well, it's not an acknowledgement that I'm less than now, but actually it's just me kind of cashing in, right, on the work that I've already done. I was already 80% there, so this is the final 20%. So I think it's going to be a bit of work for us to do kind of at system level to understand what are those small jumps that folks can make, where if you were a lorry driver, this is something that you could be doing that's quite close to where you were already, as well as trying to figure out for folks at the top of architecture, at the top of legal, at the top of a lot of these white collar jobs, what does growth look like for folks that are just entering into your profession? Great.
So there's a bit of a conundrum here that you've presented between what you said so far, and I hope you can help us navigate it, because I think it's something you alighted on, Mary, and I think, Rebecca, you felt similar, that there is a need for robust qualifications, recognised brands, things that employers, learners, workers understand, absolutely essential. The problem with all that is it can be an enormous commitment in terms of time, resource, money, life. And also alongside this, there is need, and I think, Rebecca, you referenced, micro-credentials and badges and so on, and Anne-Marie, you touched on it as well when it came to essential and core skills also. There is a need to continuously develop some of those core and essential skills linked to particular occupation groups or types of work. So how do we marry this tension between the need for this sort of trustworthy established system here and something more flexible, modular, accessible alongside it? Rebecca, I'm going to go. Sorry. Anne-Marie, do you want to? No, go Rebecca first, then I'll go to Anne-Marie, and then we'll go to Mary.
So I think my view is very much around how do you, the modularity piece, and how we have the capacity now through access to tech that we probably didn't have before in our way, that we can start thinking about what are the component parts of those qualifications and how do we make sure they're individually robust, but they are stackable. And I think there's also something very interesting around the kind of earn and learn model that then can be supported through that modularity, because it stops it being something that you have to make a sacrifice to do. Yes. And I think that's a really I think that we need to really think about how do people continue their lives and afford to live whilst they're doing things as well.
I think we have to also be quite collaborative about it.
Okay.
And I end up in academic spaces talking quite a lot about the interoperability of some of this knowledge that folks are kind of gaining. And the fact that actually a lot of the time, if you've come through with a particular academic qualification, that's something you're able to take into industry and kind of marry up and kind of cash in as much as is possible. But if you go the other way, no, it didn't happen here. We don't respect that here. And actually, you haven't earned your blood, sweat, and tears on this way, and so that's not something that we're going to accept. And so I think there's something of an interoperability between the two, or amongst a number of different stakeholders where skills building happens, which hasn't happened, which isn't something we have at the moment. But I think the other thing that I think was really, I remember this happening at UCAS actually, and I'm wondering, Mary, whether you were there when this. You can take the credit as you wish, but also this notion of equivalencies. So I remember that UCAS points. And I remember that it was kind of A levels are this counts for that, and then there were other qualifications that came in, and we had a central system of saying this BTEC or this whatever is this number of UCAS points, and it was something that allowed folks to say, okay, cool, I understand there's an equivalence now between these two, even though there's a different name, there's almost a yardstick or a barometer that we have to know what level this is, and I think the more that we can do that and allow folks to say, okay, cool, you can almost piece the bits together to say, okay, cool, if I've gained this or I've got this module, this is equivalent to this, and here's how we can get things to play. And then the final piece is linked almost to what the future of assessment could be.
Okay.
And I again get to talk to lots of different folks about different elements of this, and some of the most interesting conversations I've had in the last couple of years have been around the way that we assess skills at the moment. I think a lot of folks know it's not really transformed or changed, in decades, and it ends up being a summary in one grade or one number across quite a broad curriculum or syllabus or kind of set of skills. And something like AI allows us to build a patchwork of skills, of knowledge, of assurance that someone knows something or is able to demonstrate something.
Yes.
And so there is an opportunity that we have as well to say, this is a different visualization or different interpretation or a different way to store that information, pass that information, share that information that isn't limited to the way that we've assessed thus far. And I think that might be able to open up a little bit more, again, of how we understand how skills relate to each other, as well as the types of skills that someone has. It's evidenced in a richer way than maybe how we do things at the moment.
That's such an important point, and you touched on it earlier on, that sort of self-awareness, self-knowledge of what you have done and what you can do, and being able to articulate that in a different environment. What you're describing would enable that sort of process. Mary, this sort of robust, stable, consistent versus flexible, adaptable.
Yeah, I think, I think you've hit the nail on the head, that eating the elephant one bite at a time is the way to go. Interesting, I was for a while I was on the council of the Open University, and I learnt there, so some of you may know that after the university fees went up to 9,000 plus in 2012, students at the Open University absolutely fell off a cliff. I think at their heyday they had 250,000 students studying through the OU, and it went down to, 150,000. I mean, huge drop-off. And I think it was very convenient to say it was because the price had gone up a lot. But actually, research showed that for a lot of them, it was something different. It was because they were required to sign up for a whole degree rather than signing up for one bite of the elephant at a time. And so when the lifelong learning entitlement was announced, I was full of joy and hope. Unfortunately, I think there are elements of the design of that which will make it very different. So I think the size of 30 credits is probably too big. I think it could be smaller. And also this idea that it has to be part of a parent qualification. And that's another thing, as I said earlier on, that kind of roots it in a backwards looking. So in, what was it November 21 when ChatGPT, was it 2021 or 22? Anyway, whenever it was, you couldn't have spun up a new module on generative AI because it wouldn't have been part of an existing whole qualification. So we do need that more flexibility. And then the point you were making about the UCAS tariff, which I did have a good go at, I have to say. What's interesting about that is that it represents credit transfer. So in higher education, everybody's got the absolute inner funk about credit transfer because they say, oh, it's too difficult because it's different at this university and that module doesn't fit. And then you think, hang on, you're doing credit transfer when you admit people to study at level 4, 5 and 6 for a degree, because you're accepting BTECs and you're accepting A-levels and you're accepting a whole load of international qualifications, and you're figuring out how that prior learning can contribute properly. And then the final thing I'd say, which is about not kind of over-facing people who may be dipping a toe into learning again for the first time, sometimes in, decades, is piano lessons. I just love the idea that if you do the piano, you play and then you take grade 1, and then you get a bit better and you take grade 2, and then you get a bit better and you take grade 3. I got grade 2 violin. And, nobody said you failed when you got grade 2 violin. It's only a question of whether you go on to grade 3, which incidentally I didn't because I wasn't really very good at it.
Not too late. Not too late, Mary.
So I think there are some, and I think mathematics in particular lends itself to this, that people who think they're no good at mathematics or numerate type stuff, let them go at their own pace. Don't overface them with trying to get wretched grade 4 GCSE in one great leap. I probably wasn't actually answering the question. I was riffing off on.
No, that's all good. Riffing is good. We like that. And I'm feeling fairly resentful you mentioned grade 2 piano, because I actually failed grade 2 piano. but it was an important signalling device for me to realise that I had to stop right there, and that was the end of that. I never touched the instrument again. I've listened to piano. So. Obviously, UFI VocTech Trust is very interested in technology and its application. We've already talked, and you referenced that the Pearson review, which is deeply immersed in this. The skills imperative work is deeply immersed in this as well. Technology of different types, including types of AI, obviously is going to be changing the occupational structure of the labour market. But my question is, to what extent is technology an essential part of our response? And what are the risks in that as well? Anne-Marie, you go for it.
I'm a technologist. I'm also a mathematician. And there's something I probably... Anyway, there's something you said about maths just then that the school would not necessarily agree that you can dip in and out of maths, which is a whole nother panel for a whole nother day. This is it. Just a funny one. It's one of the only courses for degrees that if you haven't done anything in the year before you go up, they won't take. You have to have a new grade, because there's this notion that you have to be on the maths treadmill, and once you fall off it, never again you ever pick up a maths skill. But anyway, sorry. The question: tech's role. Technology is a tool. It's a tool for us to use. It's incredibly powerful. The personalization that you can have, the accessibility that you have, the repeatability, the scalability, like all of those kinds of things. So it's definitely a huge piece of the puzzle. And you'd be silly, really, not to use it properly as part of the solution. I think there's risks involved in not taking kind of the capabilities and the possibilities of using technologies at all to empower folks with skills properly and seriously. And I think we've kind of seen that a little bit in the way that Skills England has kind of played out, where we initially said, let's have an apprenticeship levy. There's a formalised system that we have where skills are delivered and folks can learn things. And all of a sudden, there are other folks that have come into the market that have been able to deploy technology for skill building. Yes. And all of a sudden, we've had to say, okay, no, well, maybe we don't only spend here. We can explore some of these new ways. So I think technology and skill building via technology is definitely something that you'd be silly not to lean into. I think the risks around it are most of the risks that we have anyway with technology, right? So there's capability risks. How much are we saying the technology is able to do versus what it really can show up and do? A great example would be this kind of AI classroom that we've seen that's kind of popped up in a particular school in a particular way. technology has limits on how much it can connect with people, right? And how much you can react to the emotions and the caring and that element of teaching, because we know teaching isn't just deliver information and then it's, received by the human being with no other type of interaction. So I think there's capability risks of what the technology actually is able to do today in its current form. I think there's definitely risks in terms of over-investing and spending in technology where you then actually don't get the payback or you don't get the ROI. And again, we'll have seen hype cycles again in edtech in lots of different places. Again, folks will remember when interactive whiteboards were going to solve everything, right? And we ended up in every single school, and those guys made a killing off DFE really, and we still have people that can't read now, all the rest of the skills that they haven't developed. So I think there's that notion of overspending, but I think the other thing is the management of the technology and the evolution of the technology. And I think it's a risk and an opportunity. To Mary's point, we do need to be more iterative in the way that folks are building skills in an environment that's changing.
Yes.
And so there's an opportunity in the technology for us to be able to do that and reflect it and use that technology to ensure that we can change things and we can reflect them as we go. But we also have to make sure that with each iteration, we're not taking a step back for particular groups that we know are at risk when things happen at scale, when we deploy technology in particular places. But you have to. Why would you go backwards? You have to go forwards. You have to be innovative about it, but you should definitely be iterative.
Yeah.
And make sure, as we've said at the Institute for Future of Work, look at your impact assessments as you go and ensure that you're not putting technology in for technology's sake for it to then end up being detrimental to kind of the overarching success measures and KPIs that you have already across the system. So
technology, of course, but how, Rebecca?
Yeah, how, Rebecca? Tell us.
Just sort that out. I think you sort of said it, technology is a tool, and I think the how is we make sure we always keep that at the forefront of our thinking. It is a tool to help strengthen the relationship between the teacher and the learner.
Yeah.
And it is a tool, and that's true even if your teacher is in the workplace or wherever it may be. The minute you think of it as an instead of, that's where the problems start to arrive, and they also start to get reinforced pretty quickly. And I think we needed a trigger warning if you're going to say interactive whiteboards, but there is a lesson that we've all kind of, we all know that lesson, and there is a really kind of, it's something very important about being thoughtful about what we do, thinking about the point and purpose of it, making sure that we are thinking very clearly about how it can assist rather than it being something that's being done in a sort of blanket, generic way.
Yeah, that's good. I think situating technology within relationships is key from what you're saying, Mary.
I think I might be the only baby boomer in the room.
That's okay.
So I go back quite a long way on all of this. I actually developed an e-learning course, as it was called in those days, in 1999 in the hospitality sector. It didn't work very well, but it was a good thing to start on. I then went on to work for a Quango called the Qualifications and Curriculum Authority, and I can remember writing a speech for my boss in about 2003, where I said we should have the first e-GCSEs by 2009. Here we are, what are we, 2025?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that I chair Pearson's UK qualifications business, and they have got this wonderful place up in Hellaby near Doncaster, which is the exam processing plant. And I think some of you should go and have a tour there, because in the middle of exams season, there are literally huge articulated lorries unloading pallet loads and pallet loads and pallet loads and more pallet loads of paper. And this processing plant is basically designed to take all these millions of exam scripts and make sure that not a single page either goes missing or gets disassociated with the candidate who wrote the answer. And they do an absolutely fantastic job, but it kind of looks like something out of the 80s. It's all boxes and people having to, cut things up and put stamps on and roll them along, what are those conveyor things? And you just think, this is just ludicrous. By the way, about 20,000 typed scripts came in from people who had special needs, and therefore that was their normal way of working. And we had to scan the typewritten scripts. I mean, it's just completely... And then, the government goes and sets up these wonderful new qualifications called T-levels.
Yes.
And guess what? They make them pen and ink assessment. And you just think, what is going... even with a brand new suite of technical qualifications, they couldn't have built in at least some technology in the assessment.
Yeah.
So actually the Pearson GCSE in computer science, I think, is still the only GCSE where you actually do it on screen, because they've realised that it was probably better to actually do code rather than write about doing code. So I'm kind of making a point that you're right, technology is not the answer for everything, but the things that you can do with technology to make assessment better, more engaging, that can be adaptive so that people aren't over-faced with assessments. It really upsets me, actually, that the government isn't keener to kind of push the adoption of technology in kind of public exams. And I think if that started to happen, then it would become much more acceptable elsewhere.
Great, thank you. Right, on that uplifting note, I'm going to go to the audience. So, any questions or thoughts on what you've heard so far? Yes, please.
I'm Kim Chaplin.
Oh, wait, there is a mic operation going on. Yeah, thank you. If you say who you are and...
I'm Kim Chaplin from the Centre for Ageing Better. I am a baby boomer too. I actually worked at the Manpower Services Commission in 1980. Remember all those things. We're really interested in lifelong learning, so I'm really glad to hear that mentioned here. But in terms of lifelong learning, the interventions that we see are often governed by ageist systems. We have a massive ageism issue in all of our systems, actually. And so I'm just quite interested in the panel's observation about how we tackle that group of people who are probably on their third careers, who're starting to be deassociated, and how we present them with upskilling and delivery that isn't actually an extension of mainstream education, that is something that fits that stage of learning.
Anne-Marie, I'm going to come to you because you referenced lifelong learning. How do we make lifelong learning truly lifelong?
I think you have to meet those folks where they are. There's some interesting examples and models that we see. I think the banks have ended up doing this because it crosses over with other agendas that they have, I guess we could say, for that part of the market. So there's some interesting models we see of folks being able to build skills in ways that meet personal needs that then end up being transferable over to what might look like a professional need. So Lloyds has their digital skills index, for example, and a lot of the banks have this as something where you can kind of come and drop in and build these kind of digital skills. And I think that's one really good example that we get to see that then means that, again, it's not about, oh, you're older and so we want to teach you these things because you're old. It's more, actually, if you're not able to access this or not able to do this with your bank account, come and spend time here, and there might be other kind of knock-on effects that you get to see. So I think that's one model that works really well. But also, again, like we said, you mentioned kind of hard to reach, which can sometimes be a bit of a controversial term because it's hard to reach by who, right? Those folks are still reachable. They're still in networks. They're still in communities. They're still connected in different ways. And so I think there is also that notion of how do you partner up with organisations that are already engaged with folks that are in that third career. And so I think we have to have maybe a little bit more of a kind of creative thinking around it. There's fractionals, this kind of notion again of kind of folks that then are fractionals. So there's quite a lot of places that you end up engaging with folks where you can then kind of talk about the skills they can build. I think the other thing, if we go back to my initial point though, is around recognising the skills that they do have, which I think is the other thing that we shouldn't forget. There's a paper I was reading earlier today looking at kind of future tech trends, talking about the folks that we end up not hiring towards the end of their careers, we're talking about kind of what happens at entry level. A lot of the time, actually, it's because the people that would have mentored them that had those skills have left. We've got this kind of brain drain at the other end. They're not hired, not brought back in. And so actually there's a lot of knowledge in those folks that, you know, you might not know how to open an email, but for goodness sake, you know how to design a building or, you know, whatever else it might be. And so how do we allow those folks to feel, again, that they're valued, that we have an asset-based approach? And is there cross-mentoring that we have, almost kind of skills swap and skills exchanges where folks can be engaged as an expert in what they are an expert in, and then we augment it with what they might not necessarily know at the moment. So I think there are different models that folks have kind of explored that could work. But again, it's doing those things at scale. And I think the other element that I'm surprised we haven't mentioned, but I thought we would have, but is the geographical cut of that as well. Because again, you tend to see particular areas, you know, the age demographic does change quite a lot. And so there could be something even I think we looked at it at the Institute, overlapping health requirements. So kind of NHS kind of health specialisms and where those are needed around the country tends to also map onto the age demographics of particular places. And so again, there's another lever of meet those folks where they are and see how you might be able to then engage in those kinds of ways.
Mary.
Yeah, I was just going to add, since I have recently become an old age pensioner, you know, isn't it daft that you've got, you're asking people to work till they're 66, or I think it's going up to 67 any day soon, and yet the new so-called lifelong learning entitlement isn't available for people over 60. I mean, it just sends all the wrong signals. And really, just to pick up your point as well, I think if we've got older people learning and demonstrably learning new skills, I think there's a fantastic kind of role modelling for younger generations, the signals that sends. You know, so I agree with you. I think it's just awful to kind of write people off just because they're in their 60s.
Can I add one more thing? You just reminded me of something, actually. One more thing is, I think I always have this notion of, so I end up saying to folks quite a lot, you know, we talk about displacement of roles, and so you may or may not, as a boomer, and you also may or may not remember this, apparently there was a time when people were employed and they put the bowling pins up at bowling alleys. Do you remember this?
No.
Okay, someone else remembers it. Don remembers.
It.
And it's interesting. We end up talking about kind of roles that have disappeared. Yeah. And I always end up thinking, you know, that person who was putting the bowling
before the
pins
kind
up,
of grab things?
Yeah, the person who was doing that. I'm like, what do they do now? Right? And because you don't pick when you were born, but that was a genuine job that folks were doing, or lift operators, or any of those kinds of things. Yeah. And it reminds me of one of my really good friends' mums has been a pensioner for a while, and she's become a social media influencer with the grandkids and herself, and is constantly on Facebook, constantly on Instagram, and is actually open. Like she's now earning money by posting online, and it makes I'm like, if you know Auntie Marietta. She was just born at the right time, right, for that to be something. She wouldn't have been able to be an influencer at the beginning of her career as she started. So I think we also have to think about it a little bit that way. You're here now, and so there's something you can do now that actually you wouldn't have been able to do when you started. And so why not? Why can't we enable and lean into that and be excited for folks as to what they can have as their third or fourth thing that they do?
Yeah, I should become an influencer, maybe.
Why not?
Rebecca.
If violin doesn't work out.
Yeah, maybe I don't think the violin is the way to go, but and I completely agree with that, and I think so when we looked at how UFI works, we were very, very deliberate about not using particular labels, and in part it was absolutely because we were seeing there being lots of frameworks that said, well, you can't have that entitlement, and that immediately says it's not worth. We don't believe that you are worth giving it to. And I know there's lots of restrictions around availability of resources, but actually, if the lifelong learning restriction is just ludicrous, because the whole point of it is to help people gain the skills they need, and it's just madness restricting it to people. And I think we talk an awful lot about kind of digital skills in particular. That seems to be the conversation there is much more open now, and we work with IDEA, and that kind of idea of reaching out into communities and helping people get confidence and motivation through the skills they can demonstrate is hugely powerful. And I think it's exactly your point. We go to where we meet people where they are, because we all know that everybody needs to be able to get skills. And if we don't, if we deliberately exclude people before we've even started, then we're already sunk.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Yes, please. And then I'll go straight to over here afterwards.
Okay, very quick one. As the proud holder of a 60-plus pass in London, I don't get the grant for skills development, but I do at least get free tube rides. I've spent all that time in my adult working life working in adult learning in the workplace, so not in training, not in education. So when I look at the skills system, I think of it being a skills ecosystem where everybody's involved. We haven't heard yet about the role of the people who benefit most from the skills of people, the people who've got the money to pay for some of that training, and the people who might be able to support people when they do the training, which is the employers. And I'd really like to hear what the panel think about that.
Great, thank you. And then it was this gentleman here. Is it Jonathan?
Yeah, so I was just going back to the point, which was because you're in a low wage job doesn't mean that you're low skilled. And the part that you said, Anne-Marie, about recognition is that a lot of the people that we work with and come across, one of the key bits is that you have people who are out of work or are in constant churn in low wage work, and they are not low skilled. They're extraordinary people, just nobody's told them that they're extraordinary. Nobody's taken the time to believe in them and to go, actually, the fact that you're building a dead game stack in your spare time, or the fact that you're working on your farm and doing all this stuff actually means you do have those skills. And I think we put so much emphasis on people getting skills and forget that people are great. And people have skills, and sometimes it's about the system taking the time to stop and recognise the talent that we have.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. You pick up either of those.
Well, I was going to say that they're connected. The two questions, and it's kind of the heart of what we're doing on this Flourish project is that so employers have the responsibility. You could argue the apprenticeship levy was forcing them really to put their money where their mouth was, use it or lose it, right? It was a bit constricted, as we've kind of commented already, on kind of policies that come from the government. We kind of spoke about it on the briefing, and I guess we haven't got the time to kind of get into it. I think there is still something about the responsibility on companies. The reticence I have on that, though, is that it's driven. There are certain drivers that they have that might not necessarily be as long-term as we want to see, or might not necessarily be as systemic as we'd want, right? And we see this without naming any names, because I haven't seen any logos, but I'm sure there's logos in different places. Certain folks, they have skills that they value, that they really want you to have and they really want you to develop. And then you end up having a workforce that kind of all just knows how to use one particular stack and one particular way. And so I think there's a tension that we have of who really should be defining that rather than just leaving it to private players. But I think it does definitely link to the second question, which is, how much power do we really want the employers to have in terms of driving what the skills are that we value at this moment? Because again, they're doing that with their self-interests in this moment, rather than, again, even sometimes thinking in a year's time or in 5 years' time. And that human being is still going to have to be there, moving around or jumping between different organisations beyond the horizon on which that company is thinking about and talking about. So it is something that those of us that are pushing companies on. How do you reckon? What does value look like, and how do you recognise value? What's the responsibility that you have to train folks when they do end up in your organisation on proprietary things, but also on newer skills that are coming up, as well as what's the investment that you should be making as an employer that, like you said, are the first folks that then benefit from people having those skills. But it's a real tension that we actually see on the kind of the entry level end of us working with particular people, knowing that they have a skill, and definitely knowing that recruitment practices lock them out of organisations that they should be in. And we almost have to kind of, hold ourselves a little bit, because if the recruitment practice and recruitment process isn't recognising that value, what do you think happens when that person's in that organisation? Right? And you've got the ways that they do business, or the ways that they promote people, or the ways that they decide what they're paying them. If you've not been able to process it and understand it on the way in, Lord knows how that's going to be something then day to day you're able to value that person and the skills that they bring. And so there's quite a lot of work that has to then be done for us to understand the way that we value skills, the way that we reinforce that systemically, and what are the norms that we have around work. Which brings me back to the kind of the good work principles that we have at the Institute for the Future of Work, and trying to get employers to do better and think about this in a long-term way. But that's pretty hard to do in the system we have at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you. Rebecca, pick up either from recognition or the role of employers, or both.
Well, as Anne-Marie said, I think those two questions are quite intrinsically linked, because it's a huge. We know that the money spent by employers is quite the bigger chunk of the pie, and so, but we're seeing that getting eroded. So it's something we do need to massively address, and we need to think about what's the incentive that we can build into that ecosystem that helps to drive better investment in skills and less protectionism around, I don't want to train you and you leave kind of challenge. And I think then it comes back to that point of what's the point of all this? Why are we training people? Why does it matter? Well, it matters because we want people to have happy and valuable lives and to feel that they're contributing. But from an employer perspective, it matters because they want to know what skills have the people they're hiring got, what skills have their workforce got. And then that links really closely into that. Well, how do you actually recognise those skills? What are the mechanisms we need in place to be able to say, we know that person XYZ has the skills we need to achieve the thing that we want to do? And that needs to get so much more detailed and nuanced.
Great, thank you. I'm going to draw us into the final question now, if that's okay, Mary. Unless there's anything you particularly wanted to add to that.
I'll just leave you with one question, actually.
Yeah.
The apprenticeship levy, whose money is it? Is it the employers or is it the government's?
I think we know the answer to that, but yeah, it's probably the latter. Who should it be? Yeah.
We need to be able to design a system where, all these initiatives have ended up warping the behaviours of employers in order to kind of cash in on whatever train to gain or ILAs or NVQs or whatever the latest thing is. And nobody's quite cracked from a kind of strategic policy point of view how you incentivise and support employers to deliver the right kind of training and qualifications and credentials to their workers.
So my final question, a short question that might require a short answer. We haven't touched that much on policy at the moment. Mary, you've just given us a good segue into it. But let's imagine a Minister of Skills or Secretary of State for Education, or even the Chancellor of the Exchequer is sat on the front row. What's the one thing you want them to be focused on when it comes to the shifts we need to make in the skills system going forward? I'm going to be really unfair and pick Rebecca first.
That is unfair. So it's a really interesting question to think about right now, actually, with lots of the other conversations that are going on in the wider space. And I think my absolute kind of fundamental belief is we need to think about it from a cross-government perspective. So I would like it to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and I would like them to be thinking about what do skills mean from a societal perspective, and then how do all the different parts of government machinery focus on delivering that, rather than it being something that is just the Department for Education thinking about the puzzle pieces. Yes. Actually, it's so important from a trade industry perspective. It's hugely important when we think about it from DWP, but it's also really, really important across health, across every part of government. So why isn't this being seen as a cross-departmental imperative, which is, I think, you never know, Skills England could get us there, but that would be my one piece, I think.
Brilliant, thank you, Rebecca. Mary?
I'm going to go a little bit off
Go for it.
Topic. Well, it's not at all off topic. Over the last 2 weeks, hasn't there been a lot about boys and men? Yeah. Mm. The CSJ report, this new programme which I haven't watched yet, Gareth Southgate, and in fact Higher Education Policy Institute today has published a report about boys' underachievement in education, which I've written a foreword to. For some reason, there is a policy blind spot about this. In fact, Emma Barnett on Radio 4 this morning was interviewing somebody about this report and said, well, does it really matter when there are still more men chief exec of FTSE 100 companies? And, that just, I was kind of blood pressure, jump. Too many men end up in prison. They're very likely to be illiterate and therefore also probably innumerate as well. They end up doing menial work. Their health suffers, so they die earlier. And of course, we get all the kind of societal things around toxic masculinity. So I think we need an education and training policy specifically for boys and men. And I also think if we want gender equality in the workplace, we have to educate men as well as women. And I would like to see equal parental leave. I would like to see employers really emphasising family life for men as well as women, because until we have men able to play their part in their family lives in the way that women are kind of assumed and expected to, I don't think we'll have proper gender equality in the workplace, which I know is all completely off the skills topic, but it's not really, because we don't pay enough attention to men and boys.
When it comes to class and gender, it's one of those groups that we're talking about that need to benefit and are at risk. Yeah. It's a great book by Richard Reeves of Boys and Men, and he's now got a foundation funded by Melinda Gates. So the US discussion clearly is quite advanced on this, and sounds like we're catching up. Anne-Marie.
I'd +1 on Mary's one, because that's always my policy. No matter what question I'm asked on what panel.
To answer another question.
It's the parental. Yeah. It's the parental leave one. It's a parental leave policy that makes sense, a shared parental leave policy that makes sense. Because at the moment it has no teeth. They kind of started and then didn't finish. Yeah.
Nobody uses it.
Well, you wouldn't use it because they haven't finished the policy. It makes no sense for any family, really, to do it, because you've not said both employers need to have a minimum amount that's being spent, or that they need to have equal kind of financial backing, right? The number of people I know that have gone off, have left work, have paused work as the first man ever in that company to take on shared parental leave, and have literally just kind of had to throw their hands up. HR's been like, we don't know how to process it, we don't know which form. And they've been like, well, I'll see you on the other side to sort it out. That's been the situation. And I think you're right. It's a knock-on effect. And I think it is because also, frustrating at the moment, as we've said already, to go back and build those skills, you need to take time out from the workforce in the way that we've set things up at the moment. And if folks aren't doing that for care, they're not going to do that for learning or for education. So I think if we work out the shared parental leave, who knows, we might have shared study leave, or things like that enable and empower folks to be able to take the time out to build skills, to make it something that is a part of the culture, and the way that folks know that they work at the moment, that you can work and you can study and you can balance them, but you can work, you can study, you can care. You can have our messy lives or just life, and no life is not messy, right? That I would +1 on that. Shared. It always comes back to proper shared parental leave.
Brilliant. Well, it's impossible to summarise this conversation. It's been so wide-ranging, but incredibly powerful and insightful. I think the two things that came up there in that final question around the fact that there are clearly blind spots across the piece, and we're not seeing the whole picture when it comes to thinking about skills and people and everything that flows from that. All I can do is thank this absolutely brilliant panel: Rebecca Garrod-Waters, Mary Curnock-Cook, Anne-Marie Imafidon. Thank you for coming along. Please do go downstairs, get some refreshment, talk with the panelists, talk with each other, see the amazing exhibition downstairs, grab a bag of freebies and enjoy the next couple of hours. Thank you very much. Thank you.